So we find ourselves this morning in what is one of the most familiar stories in the Bible, the feeding of the 5,000. And if you've done any extensive Bible study, you'll know that this is found throughout the Gospels. And in fact, in a couple of the Gospels, we have not just the feeding of the 5,000, but the feeding of the 4,000. And this story is told in a variety of ways. And each Gospel writer has his own spin on kind of exactly what it means. Or they provide a little different emphasis on the story. You'll find over our time together that this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I think I've probably told you that for me, as I look at the miracle stories, I'm perfectly content believing that they are what they are, that they're a miracle, that Jesus performed in the midst of people. Throughout the years, as biblical scholarship has become more and more sophisticated, there are those who would diminish the miracles or try to somehow rationalize them away, that they were just a part of normal human behavior. I'm content to allow the miracles to rest just as they are, as miracles. Because what I believe is that Jesus can still perform miracles today. So I don't want to take anything away from the biblical narrative and just wish that I had been able to be there and to see as Jesus would heal the sick and meet the needs of the poor and feed the hungry. See, in this story, there's all kind of enough going on. Jesus wasn't getting enough rest. So Jesus went to a place that Jesus thought he could get away and rest for a while. The disciples had had enough. They were tired of dealing with all the people that were coming and going, and they just didn't want to deal with it. They wanted a break. Now, Jesus wanted to rest and pray. I think the disciples just wanted to rest and be lazy. The people couldn't get enough of Jesus. And so as he tried to get away and rest for a bit, they followed him in great numbers. And as they gathered there, they found that there was enough room for all to be seated. There was huge hillsides and plenty of grass for all to have a nice place to spend with their families. But apparently, there wasn't enough food. Now, I try not to get preachy on this, so please hear it as much an indictment on myself as it is on anyone else or our culture. I'm constantly telling Shannon that I just can't believe how much food we waste. I'm constantly frustrated by the amount of stuff that we have. I joke around about shoes, and Shannon really isn't that bad. She's as frugal as I am. But even in the midst of my closet, there's only so many shirts you can wear and only so many pair of pants that one can wear. Yet so many of us have homes and cars full of so much stuff. And so much of it never gets used. I shared with you a few weeks ago when we were talking about packing up, and that sometimes the trouble with packing up is we got so much stuff we don't know what to do with it. When you've put away boxes for months and possibly years and don't even know what's in them, and you pull them back out only to find it was stuff that you never really needed. I love Dave Ramsey. If any of y'all are familiar with Dave Ramsey, he's a Christian commentator as it relates to finances and money. This is one of the great problems in our society, is that we buy things we can't afford, stuff that we don't need, to impress people that we don't know. We get caught in this cycle and this culture of never having enough. If we get back to the very basics, one of the theories that I learned in school that has always fascinated me is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of y'all learn about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in school. Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about the human condition, I think, in a way that no other theory really speaks, and it has its place in the Christian context. And then it's a pyramid, and it has increasing levels of what the human being needs. And at the very basic level are food, water, and shelter. Food, water, and shelter. In our Christian faith, in our deep desire to bring people into relationship with Christ, we go about our city and about our state and about our country and about our world, and we try to preach the gospel. But far too often, the people to whom we're preaching don't have their very basic needs met. If someone doesn't have food, water, or shelter, there's no way they can hear the gospel message in a way that they can receive, or it's much more difficult. I've said Jesus can perform miracles and Jesus can speak through those needs, but it's very difficult to reach someone in their very deepest need if those basic needs aren't being met. You work up Maslow's hierarchy of needs until the very top of that pyramid is self-actualization. And for us in the Christian world, it's a deep and abiding faith in Christ. It would be moving toward what Wesley would call sanctification, sanctifying grace. That grace which moves us toward perfection and wholeness in God's eyes. But we move through a series of steps of things that we need before we can get there. I don't know about y'all, but one of the southern sayings I learned real early in life is you're old enough to know the difference between your wants and your needs, and you're old enough not to let your wants hurt you. You're old enough to know the difference between your wants and your needs, and you're old enough to not let your wants hurt you. Fact of the matter is, once you get beyond a certain level in our basic needs, it's really all wants. If we're honest with ourselves. Now look, I love stuff. I've told you that. This isn't a sermon about getting rid of stuff. It's a sermon about understanding how much is enough and being able to keep that all in perspective, this relativity of this word enough. Because there's sometimes that, as we said last week, sufficiency is sufficient. That to reach a level of sufficiency is what we need to get by. But there are times when we want to move beyond a level of sufficiency. If you look up the word enough, or at least I did a search of the word enough in the Bible. I love these new tools that we have. You can never have too many electronic toys either. Just in case you're wondering, there's never enough new technology. But to have enough. I love my electronic gadgets, and my electronic gadgets allow me to carry around 10 translations of the Bible in my pocket and to search at a moment's notice any of those words. And so as I searched the word enough in the Old and New Testaments in the New Revised Standard Version, my search brought up 95 occurrences of the word enough in the entire Bible. 20 of those occurrences happening in the New Testament, but a handful happening in the Gospels, one of those being the Gospel that we're reading this morning. And it's Philip answering Jesus' question. This is the only place that, the story is told exactly this way. In the other stories, predominantly, the disciples come and say, these people want to eat. We need to send them away because we're tired. But in this particular version of the story, Jesus is messing with them. Well, what do you think we ought to do with all these folks? Jesus already knew what he was going to do. It tells us. Philip says, but, 6 months' wages wouldn't be enough money to buy bread for all these people just to have a little bit of something to eat. There were a lot of people there. Philip could never imagine that there would be enough to go around. Elsewhere in the Gospels, we encounter these challenges with enough. Often it's used to say, does someone have enough faith to be a part of their own healing process? Is there enough faith to come to Christ, to know Jesus as our Savior, and to put our full trust in Him? So Philip says, I don't know how we would ever get enough money to make this happen. We know that the little boy, or sometimes it's helpful to go back to the King James, the little lad. Now, funny enough, listen to that. You start going a little stir crazy when you're working on a series like this because you hear yourself saying these things. Y'all probably seen this bumper sticker before, and they like to make fun of it in seminary. When I pulled up the word enough in the Christian context, and I tried to do a search engine search on that, the bumper sticker that came up was, if King James was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. Y'all ever seen that? There was, when folks that think that King James is the only version of the Bible and their bumper stickers, never mind the fact that Jesus wasn't speaking in King James English, but that's neither here nor there. But I found that funny that one of the first listings that came up was that. So as we look at what's enough, as we look at this particular story of enough, we try to figure out what exactly it is that Jesus is trying to get across. Now, many of you may know, and I think we've shared this together, that one of the ways that some would rationalize this story away is that when these people gathered, that they wouldn't have come unprepared to eat, and so that they all had food in their coats and in their bags, and that they just didn't want to share with one another, and so they were kind of hoarding their food and keeping it to themselves so as not to have to share in case someone else didn't bring their food. And so one of the ways to tell the story as a miracle is that it's the miracle of opening their hearts, that when Jesus began to break bread and pass it around, others felt safe to pull out their food and to share it. I guess I can buy that explanation. I don't know. It would be a miracle because it would be the miracle of softening someone's heart. But it's a much more amazing miracle when 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish feed in excess of 5,000 people. But they didn't have enough money to buy enough food just so that they could each have a little bit. But if we go back to this adjective definition of enough, occurring in such quantity, quality, or scope as to fully meet demands, needs, or expectations. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. Far too often in our world, we're willing to sacrifice. As we talked about last week, this disposable culture that we share in. And we create the culture because that's what we're demanding from the market. And let me tell you something, it's not just the market beyond these walls, it's the market within the walls of the church. Where far too often now it's enough for us to come in and worship for a little while and go away and not think about church again till the next Sunday. I'm going to tell you that's not enough. It's not good enough. Enough work will not get done if that's the kind of Christians we choose to be. So Jesus had everybody sit down, and he took the loaves and he took the fish, and he blessed the loaves and he broke the loaves. And he blessed the fish and he began to distribute it to all who were